Ladies and gentlemen, I bet you did not expect to see me first. The whole podcasting show, Jared Justice. And today, we have a special episode for you. It's about a little man called the Taskmaster. Many people thought that he was a worshiper of Satan, an apprentice of the devil. Since I'm in control of the show and I've hijacked this thing, tonight it goes to the extreme. Just kidding, ladies and gentlemen. We're always going to be your family-friendly, fun-loving co-host. But now I introduce to you the whole podcasting show. Wait, the whole extreme. No, that's all me. I'm going to introduce to you the host with the most, Chris Belcher.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what the heck just happened, but our show just got hijacked. For those of you who have already turned off our show, sorry about that.
They're still sticking around. They're sticking around.
Oh my gosh. Well, if you're still around, I am grateful that you are. I am your phenomenal host, Mr. Podcasting Chris Belcher, and this is still your regularly scheduled Pipe Bomb Wrestling podcast. My brother from another mother, Jared Justice. Listen, you need to do that more often. That's pretty fun. So, man, you've taken a hiatus for a couple episodes, but here we are. How's it going, man?
Going pretty good, man. Sometimes, duties call, life calls. And so every now and then, we can't make the show for this reason or that reason. But hey, I'm here now. So that's what matters.
You're here now. That's exactly right. And we're talking about one of your favorite wrestlers of all time, personally and professionally in the ring. Of course, you alluded to it earlier. We're talking about the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan. But before we get there, got to take care of a little business up front. As always, you can find our podcast on Monday and Thursday, brand new content every Monday and Thursday. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening, whether that be on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, on Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. That's where you're going to find the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. And if you're watching our smiling faces on YouTube, thank you so much for doing that. We greatly appreciate it. Again, make sure you subscribe. That way you get an alert every time we drop a new episode, which again, Mondays and Thursdays. There's old school, there's new school, there's something for every wrestling fan out there on the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. To keep up with all of the breaking news that's happening within our world, make sure you follow us on social media at PBW Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, YouTube and Twitch as well. Buy a t-shirt from us at prowrestlingtees.com/PBW Podcast. Jared, let's get into it, man. The Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, something that you and I have been talking about doing an episode on Kevin Sullivan the whole time that we've been doing a podcast for about, 2.5, 3 years now. We've been talking about doing an episode on Kevin Sullivan. You finally approached me last week and you said, I think it's time to do it. And I said, let's do it. So I am going to turn it over to you and let you steer this ship since you have a personal connection with Kevin Sullivan. And I actually want to start with that, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So a lot of people may look at the title of this episode and be like, Kevin Sullivan, why are these guys covering Kevin Sullivan? He's an important figure in the wrestling business, which not a lot of people know, but he's an important figure more so in your life. Tell that personal story before we get into Kevin Sullivan, the career, and why he means so much to you personally.
So basically, it all started, me and my parents, my mom and my dad. I have an uncle that owned a condo in Daytona Beach, Florida. And he owned several different condos, and he had just acquired a new condo. I don't care to reveal the name of it now because Kevin doesn't live there anymore. My uncle has passed away, but it was called the Peninsula. It was right there in Port Orange, Daytona Beach, Florida. And so this particular year, we go to check out the new condo to stay there. He would always let us, go and stay there on the beach. So, anyways, we go and basically life is as it always is. You just go and show up and kind of check out the area and check out the place. And I checked out the hot tub and the pool, all that good stuff. Well,
real quick, give everybody context about what year is this? Remind me. It's like mid 90s.
This was whenever that he being Kevin Sullivan
pronouns
was acting like his brother was Dave Sullivan.
Okay, so
that was actually a question I asked him.
Oh yeah, so 94,
right around 94,
95. Okay, yep. Keep going.
So, anyways, the Peninsula had a top floor that you could go to, and they had a big screen TV. I mean, it's probably about the size of most of our TVs now. Like a 40-some to 60-some inch or 70, whatever. But it was called the Penthouse. And so on Monday night, me and Dad would go up there and watch Monday Night Raw and Monday Night Nitro. And there was nobody else up there. It was basically like a public place. Anybody could go up there, right. Who owned a condo or who was staying in somebody else's condo. Anyways, so I remember watching, actually, I think I was there one time whenever that Bret Hart faced the 1-2-3 Kid on Raw.
Oh, wow.
And I'm not sure if it was this time or what, but I do remember seeing either replays of it or watching it live. Anyways, huge wrestling fan. So we go down to the pool one day, and I see somebody who looks familiar to me. And I asked my dad, I said, Dad, is that Kevin Sullivan over there? And they said, who? And I said, Kevin Sullivan, the WCW guy. And he said, I doubt it is. And I said, do you care if I go over and ask him? And I'm probably like 9, 10 years old at this time. Right. And Dad said, you can go ask him. So I approach Kevin Sullivan and a woman who was laying next to him, which I didn't catch on to till after I started kind of talking to Kevin. Woman, his wife, later became Nancy Benoit. So I go up to him and I said, excuse me, sir, are you a wrestler? And he said, yes. And I said, are you Kevin Sullivan? And he said, why, yes, I am. His exact words, why, yes, I am. And I said, I thought you were. I said, I have a couple questions. I said, is wrestling real? And he said, oh, yeah, it's definitely real. And I said, okay. I said, I just heard some people say it wasn't, but I didn't believe them. I said, and my other question, is Dave Sullivan, is that really your brother? Evad? And he was like, yeah, that's my brother. He's been my brother my whole life. And so then I turned around and ran back to my parents, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's Kevin Sullivan. I asked him this and I asked him that. Well, anyways, so this was back before cell phones. Maybe Nokia was out. I don't know. But anyways, the whole cell phone picture deal didn't exist.
No.
So I think maybe it was the next day. My mom goes down to walk on the treadmill in the fitness room of the condo where you lift weights and all that. Lo and behold, Kevin Sullivan comes in. And she said, my son just loves you. He saw you at the pool the other day, the little kid that came up to you. And she said, can I, he would love to have a picture with you. Can I go get him? And he said, sure, go get him. I'll be waiting here on you. So my mom goes up to the condo, gets the camera, comes back down, and you never know about people. Are they, is he going to be there? Or is he going to be like, oh crap, I got to get out of here?
Right.
Some little kid's going to annoy me.
Right.
But he was standing there waiting, just like he said he would be.
That's awesome.
So I go down there, and I have some pictures. It's actually like kind of in a collage. But I'll send you a picture of. Maybe you can put it on for this show.
We'll definitely throw that out on social media. So that's another perk of following us on social media. I'm going to post this stuff on social media. You'll get to see young Jared at like 18 years old. And I want the headlock picture if you've got it.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going into. so we start posing for different pictures, and he's like, "Hey, get like this. Hey, get like that." And he's like, "Come here, son." Slaps me in a headlock. I felt like my eyes were going to bug out. Legitimately could not breathe. The first time in my young life that like air had ever escaped and not come back in my body.
Right.
So I'm like, and so mom takes a picture. So he's like, "All right, now you get me in one." So of course, I just put like a little headlock on and
Sure,
barely
yeah.
get it.
Yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
he's like, "Don't you know how to put a headlock on?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, but I don't want to hurt you." He said, "Put me in the best headlock." So I slapped him in the old headlock, and mom took a picture. So,
Oh, shoot.
anyways, basically over the next couple years, every time that I would go on vacation to this condo, Kevin Sullivan lived there. That's where WCW was kind of based out of. That was during the time they signed Hogan there at the MGM, I think it
Right.
was. And so I would always see Kevin Sullivan, and I would somehow run into him, take some pictures, and autographs weren't really a big thing that I knew of at the time.
Right.
But yeah, man. So he was the first celebrity wrestler, whatever of any kind, that I had ever encountered.
The first real big name for sure. Because I know
Yeah.
you and I had met some guys in Smoky Mountain, but I don't know if they were that big at that point. I mean,
Well, like on a personal level, to where you actually talk to them like a normal human being.
yeah, it was totally different from you meeting somebody at a wrestling event versus meeting somebody where he owns property and is in his personal life.
Right.
And you were able to interact with him on a regular basis. So that's awesome. It really is like no BS. That's awesome. And I remember being because you and I have been best friends since probably right before that, if not too long
Right.
right after that.
Right.
So it was right in that same time. And I remember going to your house for the first time and you saying, "Look at this." I was like, "Is that Kevin Sullivan?" Yes, that's Kevin Sullivan. And I'm pretty sure I asked you, "Did you ask him about Dave? Is Dave his brother?" Kind of thing. But
Right.
I remember being incredibly jealous. I'm like, "There's no way that you got to hang out with Kevin Sullivan." And the next year you'd come back with more pictures. I'm like, "I hate you." But
Yeah.
anyway,
Well,
so
if you
go ahead.
remember during that time, your dad would take you to wrestling events and you would come back with the Polaroid pictures.
Mhm.
And other than Smoky Mountain Wrestling, I didn't ever, my dad liked wrestling, but I was basically raised pretty poor. And
Right,
so we didn't go see many shows, especially if they
right,
didn't come right around Pikeville, Kentucky.
right,
And so you were always showing me, "Hey, I went to this WCW house show. I saw the Nasty Boys and I saw the
right.
Outsiders and Sting." And so this was kind of my way to impress you back, I guess.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it was definitely interesting that was the start of our relationship. Is it was started around Kevin Sullivan. So that being said, the reason, listeners, why we are covering Kevin Sullivan today is because he has personally affected both of our lives in that way. Jared a lot more personally than me, but I got to live vicariously through Jared in this Kevin Sullivan experience. So, that being said, man, not only was Kevin Sullivan, I'm sure, one of the nicest, if not the nicest wrestler that you've ever met.
Yeah.
Looking at him on the outside, I wouldn't necessarily think that. But
No.
that just goes to show you don't judge a book by its cover. But that being said, he was real cool to you. So personally, he means a lot to you, but professionally, he means a lot to the wrestling business, man. He's one of the most underrated, unsung heroes in the wrestling business. So that's what we're going to talk about from here on out, man, is what Kevin Sullivan has done to shape the wrestling business and maybe tell some things that not a lot of people know about.
Right. So, like you were saying, I kind of brought this show up to you. And so you were like, "Okay, well, for the first time ever, do you kind of want to, tackle the actual looking up data, the research?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And so I thought I kind of knew. I mean, like ACDC was my favorite, well, still is my favorite band. But in college, I took a public speaking class
Mhm.
and I did very minimal research. got up and talked for like 15 minutes or whatever with no notes. I was the only person that did that about AC/DC because I knew everything already. And I thought I knew everything about Kevin Sullivan. But when I started doing some research, I found some interesting things. So I'll kind of start, and you can jump in whenever you want.
Go for it.
But Kevin Sullivan, born October 26th, 1949. So that means he's basically a little less than a year older than my dad, which I didn't know. He was married on 3 different occasions. The first marriage, he had 3 kids. And I've never seen or really heard anything about any of his kids, honestly. Stands 5'9", or at least that's what he's billed as. I had no idea because I was like, what, 4 foot at the time.
Right.
But 5'9" is my current height. He was built at 250 pounds. I'm currently sitting at like 210. But this guy was solid muscle.
Sure.
I started looking up some stuff, man, about how that he kind of got into Crockett. And just some interesting things. You know, people think of Kevin Sullivan and they think of like the Chris Benoit feud sometimes, and that's it. Yep. But
there's so much before that.
Yeah.
So much before Benoit. I mean, I did a little bit of research on this because I was like, well, if we're going to do a show about Kevin Sullivan, I know even less than you do. So I want to make sure that I am up on my research and all that kind of stuff as well. Man, I did not know that he actually wrestled in the WWF in the mid-70s. He actually had an extensive run there. That's something I didn't know about.
Yeah. My research, I kind of started with Crockett.
Right.
I didn't actually see the WWF thing.
Yeah. So he did a run where he did some shows at MSG. It was only like a couple of year run up there, but I didn't know that. That was insane to me. But you mentioned to me off air when we were kind of prepping for this show about him doing a run. I guess it would have been in between Crockett runs in Smoky Mountain. Yes. So talk about the Smoky Mountain stuff, because again, that's another personal thing that you and I share a lot of Smoky Mountain shows.
So Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and Jim Cornette to this day will still usually mention Eastern Kentucky and like Martin, Kentucky, or Pikeville, Kentucky. But Pikeville College Gym was where that Smoky Mountain Wrestling would run in our area a lot.
Yep.
And so they would bring in all these wrestlers. You had some staples that were usually always there. Tracy Smothers, Dirty White Boy. Those were the main 2 that seemed like were at every single show. The Heavenly Bodies, the Rock and Roll Express, they were usually there. I think we had Rugged Ron Garvin at one point. We had Undertaker come in. We had the Gangstas, New Jack, that you just saw a documentary about a little while ago. We had Mick Foley. He was there as Cactus Jack. I remember seeing him once. And you had Kevin Sullivan. And I remember seeing Kevin Sullivan, and it was not WCW, which means it had to be Smoky Mountain.
Right.
And he, Kevin Sullivan, pronouns pal, he feuded with Brian Lee, Primetime Brian Lee, basically another staple of Smoky Mountain Wrestling that was always there. Went on to an ECW career, but I think he started pretty much in Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
And for those of you who don't know, I'll throw you some context. 1994, Brian Lee was the fake Undertaker in the Undertaker versus Undertaker match at SummerSlam 94. He was also in the Disciples of Apocalypse, the motorcycle gang in the Attitude Era. Context.
Yeah. And speaking of ECW, Kevin Sullivan, he was actually in the Eastern Championship Wrestling.
Right. Before it was Extreme.
Before it went to the Extreme. But yeah, let's see what I have here about him.
ECW. Listen,
yes.
What fascinated me in doing my research about him was that he was the tag team partner of the Tasmaniac, who would go on to be Taz. Mind blown, because those 2 guys are literally like the perfect tag team.
Basic same body structure.
Exactly.
It's kind of small, compact, kind of like me, but
Yep.
much bigger muscle wise than what I am, of course.
And you're scared that they're going to kill you.
Yeah. And this was around 1993, which was also the first mention that I saw based on Wikipedia and a few other sources of whenever we saw Kevin Sullivan and a woman, Nancy Benoit, later on,
Right.
together as like a faction.
Right.
And then, of course, they went on WCW.
Right.
More people know them there.
Right. So let's go back to you mentioned Crockett. He had 2 stints in Crockett. He went from 90 till about 92, and then he did his ECW and Smoky Mountain stuff, and then he went back to WCW in 94. What is your, if you can pinpoint, other than meeting him, because obviously you knew who he was before you met him, what's your earliest wrestling memory of seeing Kevin Sullivan? Was it, because mine, I'm going to tell you mine, is when he was in the Varsity Club with Mike Rotunda and those guys in his first Crockett run.
Correct.
Were you there? Is that more your first memory, or is it more like Dungeon of Doom, Faces of Fear, Cactus Jack teaming up with him?
So I don't remember watching WCW whenever it was like Crockett or the NWA.
Right.
Very much. My first real memory is, like I've told on this show before, whenever my papa would come over and watch WCW Power Hour.
Yep.
And so as far as watching it live, Kevin Sullivan in, Smoky Mountain, I guess, would be the first time I actually saw him, and then WCW.
Yeah.
But around the time I started watching WCW, I would find those pirated NWA tapes at different like flea markets, or like you go to some wrestling, or like a VHS store and go to the wrestling section, or like some place where you rent movies.
Sure.
And I would buy up some NWA tapes and watch Kevin Sullivan. But the thing that sticks out to me about Kevin Sullivan as my first like big time memory was him clocking Chris Benoit in the head with the wooden chair. I don't remember ever seeing a wooden chair used until that.
Well, and not only a wooden chair used, but like a wooden chair shattered. Like the chair shattered everywhere.
Yeah.
So, that Benoit feud was definitely what sticks out to most everybody. We'll get to that in just a second. But the what a lot of people know Sullivan for, and people look back on it and like, well, that was a piece of crap because it was just a faction of heels to feed to Hulk Hogan, was the Dungeon of Doom. He did the Faces of Fear, and then they brought in Kamala, and then they changed the names of Faces of Fear, and they brought in the Giant, and it was everybody against Hulk Hogan. But you had Kevin Sullivan sitting on this throne with whatever I don't remember what the leader guy's name was. He didn't ever wrestle. It was this huge guy that was painted up all white and everything. Yeah. I don't remember what his name was, but a lot of people crap on that. It was like, looking back on it, it's stupid. Okay, maybe it is. But to us as 8-10-year-old kids, man, the Dungeon of Doom was like the heel faction. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember us actually. We would get those. We would go over to the swimming pool, and we would get those blue floats that you always find.
Yep.
And put a wrestling ring. It was a WCW wrestling ring, that first real crappy one with the ropes that were terrible.
Yep.
And we would put like Kevin Sullivan and Sting and Big Bubba Rogers. And it was the line of WCW figures that looked like the old LJN WWF figures.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know what you would call them, but I know what you're talking. I know exactly what you're talking about because between you and I, we had every single one of them.
Oh yeah, and so like we would do like the whole Bash at the Beach type thing and make them wrestle on like the floats or whatever. And I always remember Kevin Sullivan being a part of that. And the guy who played, what was his name? It was almost like it was a name similar to what they called Vince McMahon before they revealed him as like the ultimate person behind.
Oh, the higher power.
The higher power. It was something like that. But the guy was involved in wrestling. I actually read about it once. He was involved in wrestling in some way, a former wrestler or something. I just can't remember who that was.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't remember what the guy's name is, but I know he was pretty creepy looking.
And we would watch that and actually be scared
I know.
of, Brutus, the frickin' barber beefcake or whatever, him as
Zodiac.
Zodiac. And then you had, like you said, Kamala. You had Earthquake as Shark, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep, he was Shark.
So those guys are pretty scary, man, for for kids back in that time. I mean, people our age now may have laughed at it back then,
Right.
but I mean, I thought it was pretty cool at the time.
So talk about the evolution when you go from the Dungeon of Doom, you go after the Hulk Hogan feud. You mentioned it just a few minutes ago, the feud with Chris Benoit, probably what Kevin Sullivan is most known for in his career. Take it away and tell the story of not necessarily their feud, but why this feud sticks out as so important with Nancy's involvement.
So, as I mentioned earlier, Nancy was romantically involved with Kevin Sullivan.
His wife, right?
Yes, that was his second wife. They actually did not have a kid together, but so Kevin Sullivan also wore the hat of being a booker backstage. So he would plan out a lot of the wrestling matches.
Right.
He liked Chris Benoit, thought Chris Benoit was a good worker, and Kevin Sullivan, he had, he teamed up and was against like people like not the Sheik, but who was the dude, Abdullah the Butcher. A lot of these people that you remember as being hardcore.
Wait a minute. Was Abdullah the guy? Was he the higher power guy? Keep telling the story. I'm gonna look it up. Keep telling.
Okay.
Keep telling the story. I'm gonna look it up.
But anyways, Kevin Sullivan was always involved with a lot of guys who were later, whenever the whole hardcore thing became a thing, he was associated with a lot of wrestlers like those. And of course, Chris Benoit was a hard-hitting, hardcore wrestler. And so he liked Chris Benoit, the way he wrestled, thought he could have a good feud with him, booked them together, booked Nancy, his current wife, to basically turn on him being Kevin Sullivan, and associate with Chris Benoit. Well, at the time, the heels, had to stay with the heels, the faces with the faces. Whoever you were with on TV, that was who you were supposed to travel with and be seen around in public. So that meant that Benoit and Nancy had to spend time together. Lo and behold, he booked, he being Kevin Sullivan, booked himself into a shoot, because that Benoit and Nancy really became romantically involved, and then they got married.
Right.
So during this whole mess, you had Kevin Sullivan and Chris Benoit working against each other on TV.
Yep.
Them really legitimately not liking each other.
Yep.
Because of Nancy. And I mean, this was some hard-hitting, hardcore action. I mean, whenever I think of Benoit pre-WWE, WWF, I think of him and Kevin Sullivan. I mean, who else? Is there anybody else you can think of that you think, hey, man, that match or that feud sticks out?
No, I think definitely Benoit, because it just Kevin Sullivan was one of those old time. Like, you could argue that Kevin Sullivan's prime, that what other people would consider his prime in wrestling, would have been in the Crockett days or in his Florida days as the Prince of Darkness before he came to Crockett. And as far as wrestling people know, that's what they know him the best for. What the average wrestling fan knows him best for is absolutely his feud with Chris Benoit. And I will go ahead and say this: if you can handle watching it, because I know a lot of people can't, the Dark Side of the Ring episode about Chris Benoit, if you can get through watching it, they go in depth on this Kevin Sullivan situation with Nancy's sister. They interview her on there, and they also interview Chris and Nancy's son. He talks a little bit about it too. Kevin is not on that episode. He actually declined to be on the episode. but Nancy's sister is on there, and she goes in depth about this relationship, this sort of, love triangle kind of thing, and talks about it and how it all kind of happened. So at least go back and watch that, and that'll give you a little bit more of a perspective on how it all happened, because in reading various interviews and stuff, Kevin actually wanted them, like you mentioned, travel together, hold hands in the airport, even when they weren't together, and to really sell it, because kayfabe was real at that point. So because Kevin wanted them to sell it so much, obviously they got involved, and then one thing led to another. Now, I will say, I think I remember hearing this on Dark Side of the Ring, that Kevin and Nancy were already having problems before this Benoit deal happened.
Well, part of the reason why Kevin Sullivan declined to be a part of the whole Dark Side of the Ring fiasco was that, from everything that I've gathered, from what I've read and what I found out, there were some hard feelings because either Nancy had blamed Kevin for like being physical with her, or led her family to believe that he was.
Oh,
so
yeah,
he did not
right.
want to cause further feelings, and so he stayed out of the whole thing.
Right.
But later, he told his side of the story, which was that he was never physical with her. And what I know of Kevin Sullivan, just from meeting a guy who would wait downstairs to take pictures with an 8, 9, or 10-year-old, and make a point that whenever I saw him every year at the Peninsula, the condo, to come over and speak to me, I didn't sense a real bad bone in his body. I mean, I believe the man. I don't think he was ever physical. I don't know what Nancy may have said, to lead her family to believe that, or maybe that, sometimes you say things to your family about somebody you're currently with because that you want them to approve the next person you're getting with. So you try to make them out to be the worst person possible. That's the first thing that entered my mind. But in 2007, as I found out doing research for this, Kevin Sullivan actually did kind of, I guess, pay somewhat of a tribute to Chris Benoit and to Nancy. And so I thought that meant a lot. That after everything that happened, everything that was said about him or insinuated to whomever or whoever, he still, kind of let it be known that he respected Benoit and that, he had loved Nancy. And so I thought that was great.
And even before Benoit passed away, I'm pretty sure that I read somewhere that he did an interview that he respected Sullivan as well. They had much mutual respect for each other as their careers and things like that. They just didn't get along personally for obvious reasons. Exactly. Exactly. By the way, the guy in the Dungeon of Doom was Curtis Iakea. So we were totally off there, but I looked it up.
Was he involved in wrestling? I thought I read that he was.
He was involved in wrestling, but he wasn't, I don't want to say big time, but he was not a well-known name. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
In the quick research that I did, I couldn't figure out how he got that gig, but he did get that gig. So Benoit, again, some of my most fond memories as a kid watching wrestling, because that was really the first street fight, Falls Count Anywhere craziness outside of ECW.
Bash at the Beach.
Exactly. That I was witness to. I mean, they fought on Nitro. They fought a Bash at the Beach. I think they fought a Great American Bash. I mean, you got Dusty Rhodes on commentary going, they're going into the ladies' room. They're in the ladies' room. There's a woman in the men's room. There's a woman in the men's room.
Fun fact. So, of course, that Kevin told me that wrestling was real because that's what you did back then.
Sure.
But I actually saw him in person whenever that he had been on TV with a black eye, like on Nitro. I think I saw him on Tuesday, like right after Nitro one time. He didn't have a black eye, ladies and gentlemen. Mind blown. How could he heal that fast? How could this happen? He's
Oh.
Superman.
Oh, that's hilarious. So we've talked a lot on this episode, man, about Kevin Sullivan, the wrestler, and his legacy as a wrestler. And I know you did a lot of prep for this episode. So before I kind of move us along to the Booker side of Kevin Sullivan, was there anything else that we left out wrestling wise that you want to make sure that you address before we move on?
Basically just, some of the names that he was involved with, just to kind of run it down. Kevin Sullivan, of course, formed the Varsity Club
Yep.
in Crockett with Rick Steiner and Mike Rotunda. He formed Sullivan's Slaughterhouse with Mick Foley, at the time Cactus Jack, and Buzz Sawyer. Sawyer was later replaced with Bam Bam Bigelow. And he teamed in Eastern Championship Wrestling in his debut match. He teamed there with Abdullah the Butcher against Stan Hansen and Terry Funk in a bunkhouse match at Ultra Clash. So I just thought that was interesting. I mean, that had to be one of the earlier bunkhouse matches that happened that Dusty Rhodes was not involved with, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Oh, no doubt. And that's definitely a match that I certainly want to go back and see if I can find somewhere. So it was Sullivan, Abdullah, Terry Funk, and who was the other one?
Oh man, Stan Hansen. Terry Funk and Stan Hansen were on the same team against Kevin Sullivan and Abdullah.
I mean, you talk about a who's who of tough guys in that match. I mean, holy crap. All right, man. Let's move on. But before we do, if you are just now joining us for some odd reason, if you've just now discovered us, this is the Bite Bomb Wrestling Podcast. I am your phenomenal host, Chris Belcher. You can follow me on social media right there on your screen. It's at Chris Belcher 24. And we are talking all about the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan. We talk about new school. We talk about old school, everything in between here on the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. Our shows drop Mondays and Thursdays. Follow us at PBW Podcast all over social media. And if you forget all those things, we got a fancy little ticker right here at the bottom if you're watching on YouTube that reminds you of where you can find the podcast, when you can find the podcast, and that sort of thing. If you are listening on a traditional audio format, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Give us a 5-star review, not 1, 2, 3, or 4, but 5-star review, ladies and gentlemen. If you are watching us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Leave us a comment below. We greatly appreciate it. All right, man. Kevin Sullivan, the Booker. Maybe what he gets the least amount of credit for, but what he should get the most credit for, at least in my opinion. Now, in a lot of other wrestling circles, I'm sure he gets a lot of credit for it. But as a general wrestling fan, I don't think people know that he was the mastermind of some of the best storylines in WCW. Has anybody ever heard of the NWO? I mean, Eric Bischoff created it. Kevin Sullivan made that engine go, man.
Yeah. So basically, right around the time whenever that him and Chris Benoit were having their feud, Kevin kind of stepped into more of a Booker role. That was, that was one of his last big feuds that aired on national TV. And so Kevin Sullivan, I mean, if you listen to Conrad Thompson's podcast, I mean, any of them with Bischoff, with Hearn, JR,
Sassafras,
Tony Schiavone, what is
Don't
it?
even say it. Don't even say it. Don't even say it.
Marco.
Anyways, I know where you're going.
But anyways, they all credit Kevin Sullivan for being one of the best minds in wrestling ever.
Yep.
And those were the guys that knew, to us fans, this was right around the time that the internet was kind of starting to emerge.
Yeah.
And so nobody really knew who was planning what was happening on TV. Once Kevin went off TV after the feud with Benoit, then people just kind of thought that he, I guess, just went away and wasn't involved with wrestling. But that was far from the case, man. He was heavily involved backstage.
He was there backstage. He was, like I said, making the engine go as far as the booking is concerned. I mean, obviously, Eric Bischoff was the mastermind in creating the NWO. But Man, I remember just listening to Bischoff's podcast, and it seems like every time the NWO was brought up, he brings up Kevin Sullivan because,
Exactly.
Conrad will ask him, about this storyline or that storyline. And he would say, in the beginning, I wasn't involved in creative as much. That was all Kevin Sullivan. So you got to think, man, in the beginning,
There was Kevin Sullivan.
right. And on the 8th day, God created Kevin Sullivan. But no, like in all seriousness, man, Bischoff gives the credit where credit is due. When the NWO was at its hottest, Kevin Sullivan was right there, man. And that just goes to show you how incredible of a mind that he had. And he's gone on to work for some indie promotions after WCW went under, I believe. And I don't have those in front of me, but he's done some things in the wrestling business since WCW went under. But what he's most known for, obviously, is the Benoit stuff and the great storylines that he created that propelled WCW to the top of the wrestling world in the 90s.
And one thing, man, for some reason, this has been going through my mind the whole time. I'm thinking either in Smoky Mountain or NWA or Crockett that Kevin Sullivan, and I'm wanting to think it was Smoky Mountain for some reason. But he was involved in like one of the coal miners' glove match, like where you put them up on a pole. But I think it was some sort of spike, like a spike that they used.
Yeah.
And they had it in a box up on a pole because
and it was over.
Yeah, it was
Jim
over.
Cornette was over.
Right. Yeah. Well, double pole.
Oh no! Oh no! Not that! No! Oh Lord! You're trying to steer this thing way off the tracks.
Was that a Sunny story? No, that couldn't be a Sunny story. Anyways, double cheese.
She was in Smoky Mountain, so that makes sense. Anyway, we are really going off the rails here. All right, man. Kevin Sullivan, man, the guy has been all over the world as far as wrestling is concerned and has made a significant impact everywhere that he's gone. So for those of you...
And he actually, to interrupt you for a second, he actually was part of FMW over in Japan for a small amount of time. Just to throw that in there. And that's where the most hardcore of the hardcore guys go.
Right. So, I mean, you just got to... For those of you who are listening that don't know a lot about Kevin Sullivan, please go back and do your research. Please check this guy out. And for the love of everything that is good, throw your WWE network to Bash at the Beach 1996. I think it was 96, right? Or was it 97? I think it was 96.
It had to be 96, yeah.
I'm pretty sure you're right. Yeah. No.
Look it up.
I'm looking it up. Okay.
Tell these good people the truth.
Okay, I'll tell these people the truth. I mean, I know Bash at the Beach 96 was the turn, was Hogan's turn. I'm trying to figure out here. Hang on.
It was like 94. I mean, 95, 96. It had to be.
It was 97. It was 97.
No way.
Yep. 97 was
so during one of the biggest boom periods of wrestling, you had this feud, which was booked on top. One of the things that people still remember with Kevin Sullivan, who nobody gives credit to, that he deserves to this day.
Yep.
There you go.
The summer of 1997, go back and throw it in your WWE network on the Peacock. Bash at the Beach 1997. Like I said, I'm pretty sure they wrestled on some nitros leading up to it. You are never hosting this show again. Good grief. Anyway, go look it up. The summer of 97.
It's like saying double time. Double cock on the Cock Network.
Okay. Oh my. Okay.
It's peacock. It's just you chop off the first. I mean, even the first sounds bad. P. Then you combine it with cock. I mean, any way you put it, it sounds bad. But it's not. It's peacock. It's a turkey. It's like a turkey-like thing.
All right, listen, I am afraid to do this, but as we get ready to close up shop on this episode and put a bow on the Taskmaster, anything that we left out, man, anything that you want to throw our people's attention to make sure that they check out from Kevin Sullivan, anything we left out before we wrap up and sign off here?
One thing that I would like to know, if anybody out there knows that I really couldn't find, it was one of the main things I was trying to find out, was why that Kevin Sullivan always did this. I mean, this was during a time when you had Kiss and AC/DC and people were saying that Kiss was like Knights in Satan's Service, and AC/DC was against Christ Devil's Child. But he was always doing like this kind of what could be interpreted as satanic type of character.
Prince
with
of
like
Darkness.
The little lightning bolts on his head and stuff. I would love to know how he got started in that. I did see some early pictures of him and woman, and I read some stuff that kind of alluded to that they almost came up with that together, because on some of the indies that you were talking about, they did almost like a satanic couple type of team combo. So, I mean, if anybody out there knows why, or Kevin, if you're listening, buddy, after all these years, hit your boy up. Let me know how this all got started. I would love to know how he originally got his gimmick. Maybe it was just out of that crazy creative mind that he had. But, I mean, that's just something I would like to know.
I mean, yeah, I definitely think that'd be interesting. I'm going to do my research as well, and maybe we'll follow up this coming week, where you make sure you catch us on Thursday with a preview of NXT TakeOver in your house, as well as everything else current in the wrestling business. Make sure you check us out this coming week on Thursday. So maybe we'll follow up with some research on that episode. But make sure in the meantime and in the between time, thank you, Chris Jericho, subscribe to us wherever you find your podcast. That is on Apple Podcasts, it's on Google Play, that's on Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube or on Twitch, thank you for doing that. Make sure you subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it.
If you're going to do your research, if you were to research animals that look like turkeys and peacocks, you would also find an animal called a guinea that used to run across this ceiling that was like one of those ceilings that was aluminum back in the day whenever I lived over on Coon Creek. And these guineas would jump up and they would run across the top and wake me up every morning. So I'm just saying, if you look up, cocks and turkeys and guineas, you can find several animals in that genus.
Where the heck did that come from?
You were talking about research. I was trying to defend why that whenever I talked about peacocks, it was not a bad thing. Anyways.
Moving right along. Moving right along. Make sure that you follow me on social media. I'm at Chris Belcher 24. I throw it up there on the screen for you. And Jared is at JWJust01. Make sure you get him on the Instagram. You can follow the show at PBW Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Again, brand new shows on Mondays and Thursdays. Buy yourself a t-shirt at ProWrestlingTees.com/PBW Podcast. Listen, I'm going to mute your mic and turn you off.
It was my show. For once, it was kind of my show.
Anything else you want to add there, host, before we sign off?
I'm going to throw it back over to the host with the most.
All right. For my brother from another mother, Jared Justice, giving the old Larry Sabisco wave. We are signing off on this edition of the My Bomb Wrestling Podcast. My name is Chris Belcher. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you guys down the road.